It was a bright summer morning, and the sun was shining over the quiet suburban neighborhood. Birds chirped in the trees, and a gentle breeze made the leaves dance. Everyone seemed calm, peaceful, and ready to enjoy the weekend. In one particular house, a family was preparing for a small pool party. It was nothing fancy, just a few neighbors, some kids, and the usual snacks. But for the family hosting the party, this day would turn out to be far from ordinary. The narrator, a father, was helping his daughter set up the small inflatable pool in their backyard. She was excited, wearing her new bikini for the first time that summer. Her laughter echoed through the yard as she ran around, splashing water here and there. Her little brother joined in, giggling as he tried to splash her back. Everything seemed normal, cheerful, and full of innocent fun. But not everyone was here to enjoy the party quietly. From the corner of the yard, a young boy, about the same age as the narrator's daughter, watched her closely. This was HOAKaren's son, a boy known in the neighborhood for being curious about everything, but today, he seemed different. He wasn't playing with the other kids or running around with a smile. No, today he seemed unusually focused, his eyes following the narrator's daughter wherever she went. At first, the father thought it was nothing. Kids often stared, got curious, or even copied each other's actions. Maybe he was just watching her swim. Maybe he just liked the pool. But something about the way the boy's gaze lingered made the father uneasy. There was a small, almost invisible smirk on his face, the kind that didn't belong to a child playing innocently. The neighbors had started arriving, waving, and greeting each other. HOAKaren herself wasn't far behind. She was a tall woman, always dressed perfectly, with a sharp look in her eyes. Everyone knew her. She was the kind of person who watched every little thing in the neighborhood, from the color of your mailbox to the height of your hedges. Her son often followed her lead, mimicking her rules and her strict attitude. Today, however, he was alone, and she seemed busy talking to another neighbor across the street. As the narrator set up the cooler with drinks, he noticed Karen's son slowly walking closer to the pool. At first, it seemed casual, he was just walking around, pretending to look at the flowers. But then he crouched by the edge of the pool and stared more closely. The father felt a chill run down his spine. There was something not right about this. He called his daughter over, hoping to distract her from the boy's attention. "Hey, sweetie, can you help me get the towels?" he said, keeping his voice light. She giggled and ran toward him, clutching the towels. But the boy stayed, watching. And not just watching, he seemed to be studying every detail, every movement, with an intensity that made the father's stomach twist. He felt a knot form in his chest. This wasn't normal curiosity anymore. Then, the father's mind went back to small warnings he had heard from other neighbors. A few days ago, someone mentioned how Karen's son had a habit of checking out other kids' behavior in ways that made people uncomfortable. They said it jokingly at first, like it was a little quirk. But now, seeing him up close, it didn't feel like a joke anymore. The narrator tried to stay calm. He didn't want to create a scene. After all, HOAKaren was powerful in the neighborhood. Everyone knew she could make life difficult if you crossed her in even the smallest way. But his protective instincts over his daughter were stronger than his fear. He knew he had to watch carefully, even if it meant standing silently at the edge of the yard and keeping an eye on the boy. Meanwhile, Karen's son seemed to notice that he was being watched. For a moment, he froze. Then, almost like a game, he leaned slightly closer, pretending to check the pool water. His movements were slow, deliberate, calculated, and it sent an electric sense of unease through the father. He tightened his grip on the towels, his mind racing. At that very moment, other kids started running toward the pool, shouting and laughing. The narrator's daughter ran to join them, splashing water with joy. The father relaxed slightly, thinking maybe the boy would be distracted. But no, Karen's son didn't join in. He stayed at the edge, carefully observing, as if nothing else existed around him. The tension was subtle but real. It was in the way the wind seemed to still around the boy, in the way the laughter of the children sounded distant when you looked at him. And then it hit the father, this wasn't just a moment of awkward curiosity. It was something else, something deliberate. He remembered the small incidents in the neighborhood before, the things that seemed minor but now started making sense. A disappearing toy, a child who suddenly felt uncomfortable around him, strange questions about clothes or behavior. They all added up, pointing to a pattern he hadn't fully understood until now. The father's mind raced. Should he confront the boy right now? Or wait for HOAKaren to appear? He felt the weight of the situation. One wrong move, and it could explode into a neighborhood scandal. One wrong move, and his daughter could be at risk. But staying silent didn't feel like an option either. And then, just as he was deciding, the boy made a move that made the father's heart skip a beat. He reached toward the pool area, pretending to adjust something, but in reality, inching closer to the daughter's side. The father stepped forward instinctively. At that very moment, the camera of suspense in the father's mind clicked. This day was about to take a turn he could never have predicted. He had to act, and fast. But how do you confront the son of HOAKaren, who everyone knew was untouchable in the neighborhood? How do you protect your daughter without starting a fight that could spiral out of control? The father's eyes met the boy's. For a brief second, the smirk vanished. The boy looked surprised, caught in the act, or maybe testing his limits. And in that instant, the father realized, this wasn't just about kids playing. This was bigger. This was about boundaries, respect, and courage. The sun kept shining, the kids kept laughing, but the tension was thick. Everyone else seemed unaware of the silent drama unfolding at the pool. The father knew that what would happen next could change everything, not just for him and his daughter, but for the neighborhood as a whole. And just as he took a step closer, ready to intervene, a voice called from across the yard. Is everything okay here? It was HOAKaren, and she was watching. The father froze. The boy looked down, pretending to be innocent. And in that moment, the stakes had just been raised. This was the hook. The day that seemed ordinary was no longer ordinary. Something was about to happen that no one in the neighborhood would forget. The day had started with laughter and sunshine, but now the backyard felt different. The father couldn't shake the uneasy feeling crawling up his spine. It wasn't just the boy at the pool anymore, it was the way the air seemed heavier around him, like the sunlight was slightly dimmer when Karen's son walked near. After HOAKaren's sharp voice had interrupted the moment, the boy acted like nothing had happened. He straightened his shirt, smiled at his mother, and then returned his gaze toward the pool. But the father noticed a small, almost invisible twitch at the corner of his mouth, a smirk that didn't belong to a child. Something about it told him this wasn't innocent play. The narrator's daughter, still laughing and splashing water, didn't notice the tension. She had no idea that someone was watching her, not just casually, but with an intensity that made her father's chest tighten. The father stepped closer, his mind racing. He remembered the small incidents from days before, the boy asking funny questions about what the girls wore at the pool, standing a little too close, always finding a reason to be near. It all clicked now. The father's eyes followed the boy as he moved around the pool like a shadow. He pretended to help pick up toys but never let his eyes wander from the daughter. The narrator noticed something even more disturbing. He seemed to be timing her movements, watching how she reacted, almost like he was planning the next step in a game only he knew the rules to. The father's heart beat faster. He wanted to speak up, but his mind ran through the possible outcomes. HOAKaren was close by, and confronting her son directly could backfire. The neighborhood had always whispered about her influence, how she made life difficult for anyone who crossed her or questioned her family. But the father couldn't ignore what he saw. Not this time. He tried subtle strategies first. He positioned himself between the boy and the pool, casually moving around as if he was just tidying the yard. He made sure to keep his daughter closer, giving her towels, snacks, and small tasks, anything to keep her attention away. But the boy didn't seem fooled. He would pause, glance at her, and then look away like nothing happened, but the way his eyes lingered betrayed him. The father noticed other neighbors starting to chat and laugh near the front yard. They didn't see the tension, the silent game unfolding at the back. The father felt a flicker of panic. What if Karen's son took advantage of the distraction? His mind raced through the possibilities. Should he call HOAKaren out directly?
Should he take his daughter inside? Or should he confront the boy in front of everyone? Then something unexpected happened. Karen's son picked up a small inflatable pool toy, pretending to inspect it, and walked closer to the daughter. His movements were slow, deliberate, careful, almost as if he knew he was being watched but didn't care. It was the way he held the toy, the way his gaze darted briefly toward the father, and then back to the daughter, that made the father's stomach knot. A small detail made the father's heart skip a beat. The boy was mimicking how the father had moved earlier, blocking paths, positioning himself, creating subtle barriers. He was learning, observing, calculating. And suddenly, the father realized that this wasn't a random act of curiosity. It was deliberate. The narrator's mind flashed to a memory from last week. A neighbor had mentioned how the boy was always watching, always learning, as if he collected secrets like toys. At the time, it had sounded harmless, almost funny. But now, seeing him in action, it felt like a warning sign too late to ignore. The father swallowed hard and stepped closer. His hand rested lightly on his daughter's shoulder, a silent shield. He kept his voice calm, casual, but firm. "Hey, why don't you go grab a drink?" he suggested to his daughter, hoping to move her away. She obeyed, giggling, leaving the boy behind. But as soon as she was out of sight, Karen's son's eyes followed her until she disappeared inside the house. The father clenched his fists. This boy didn't just wander, he followed patterns, studied behaviors, and waited for the right moment. Something inside the father snapped. He couldn't let this go any further. He had to do something, but he also had to be smart. One wrong move, and it could explode. He scanned the yard, noticing the positions of neighbors, the angle of the sun, the toys scattered around, everything he could use to stay in control. And then, almost like a challenge, Karen's son approached him directly. He smiled, sweet, innocent, teasing, but his eyes held something else, a spark of mischief, maybe arrogance, maybe defiance. "Why are you always watching me?" the boy said, pretending to pout. But his smirk betrayed him. The father forced a smile. "Just making sure everyone stays safe," he said. But inside, he knew this was bigger than a smile could fix. From across the yard, HOAKaren watched silently. She didn't intervene yet, just observed. The father noticed her glare. It was sharp, calculated, protective. She had always been like that, watchful, ready to defend her family at any cost. But he had to act. He had to protect his daughter before it went too far. The tension hung thick in the summer air, heavy like humidity before a storm. The kids splashed and laughed, oblivious to the silent game unfolding, while the father and the boy faced each other like two chess players, each waiting for the other to make a move. The father realized that what had started as a simple backyard party had turned into something more dangerous. He couldn't ignore the patterns, the behavior, the subtle signs of premeditation. He had to be vigilant, careful, and decisive. And as he watched the boy slowly back away, pretending to join the other children, the father knew one thing for certain: this wasn't over. The suspicion in his mind had grown into a resolve, a silent promise. Whatever came next, he would not let his daughter become a target. The summer day continued, but now it felt different. Shadows seemed longer. Laughter seemed sharper. And somewhere in the corner of the yard, Karen's son was plotting his next move. The father's heart pounded. He knew the storm was coming, and it was only a matter of time before it hit full force. The air felt thick that afternoon, heavy like a storm waiting to break. The backyard, once filled with laughter and sunshine, now seemed smaller, almost trapped under the weight of unspoken tension. The father's eyes never left Karen's son. He watched every twitch, every subtle movement, every glance toward his daughter. Karen's son, for his part, seemed perfectly calm, too calm. He moved slowly, carefully, like a chess player calculating each move. Nothing about him looked guilty at first glance. His hands were idle, his smile polite, even sweet. But the father had learned to read the small signs, the way the boy's gaze lingered too long, the quiet smirk that appeared when no one was looking, the way he adjusted his stance as if rehearsing for something. The father knew he had to act. Hesitation could cost him more than embarrassment, it could put his daughter in danger. He took a deep breath, trying to steady the fluttering panic in his chest. His steps were deliberate as he approached Karen's son. The boy looked up, pretending surprise, but the father could see the glint in his eye, the flicker of defiance, maybe even challenge. "Hey," the father said, keeping his voice calm but firm. "I need to ask you something." Karen's son tilted his head, as if curious. "What's up?" he asked, his tone light, mocking even, though he tried to hide it. The father didn't smile. "Why were you watching my daughter like that?" The boy's eyes widened just a little, enough to notice, but not enough to admit guilt. He shifted his weight, playing with the edge of the pool, acting casual. "I wasn't watching her. I was, checking the pool water," he said, glancing toward the shallow end. The father's chest tightened. He saw the lie instantly. It was small, barely noticeable, but it was there, the hesitation in the voice, the tiny flicker of the eyes. "That's not what it looked like," the father said quietly, but with steel in his tone. "I saw you." Karen's son laughed nervously, then tried to step back. "It's not a big deal," he said. "I was just curious." Curious. The word made the father's blood run cold. He looked around quickly. Other kids were playing, neighbors chatting, and HOAKaren was across the yard, pretending to talk to someone but clearly observing every move. The father knew that raising his voice could bring an instant confrontation with her, a woman who had a reputation for creating neighborhood drama when she felt challenged. But he couldn't ignore it. "Curious? That's not curiosity," he said firmly. "That's crossing a line. And you know it." The boy's smirk faltered for a brief second, just enough to show the father that he knew he had been caught. But then he straightened, trying to regain control of the situation. "You're overreacting," he said, shrugging. "It's just a swim party." The father stepped closer, keeping his voice low but unwavering. "I'm not overreacting. You don't touch or look at people that way. Especially my daughter. Do you understand?" For a moment, Karen's son said nothing. The laughter of children and splashing of water filled the silence, making the tension thicker, sharper. His eyes darted toward his mother, maybe for help, maybe for validation. HOAKaren was watching him carefully, her sharp gaze flicking between the father and her son, her lips pressed tight. The father didn't back down. "I'm serious," he said. "If you ever try to do something like this again, there will be consequences. Do you get me?" The boy's bravado wavered. For the first time, the confident, untouchable smirk faltered. But still, he tried to deflect, crossing his arms. "What consequences?" he asked, voice shaky but trying to sound cocky. Before the father could answer, HOAKaren stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "What's going on here?" she demanded, her voice cutting through the backyard like a knife. She looked at her son, then at the father. "Are you accusing my son of?" "I'm not accusing," the father interrupted calmly but firmly. "I'm telling the truth. He was acting inappropriately around my daughter. I saw it with my own eyes." The mother-son dynamic shifted instantly. Karen's son tried to smile, but it was a weak attempt. HOAKaren's jaw tightened. She looked as if she wanted to explode, but at the same time, the father could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. Perhaps she realized this wasn't something she could easily dismiss. The father stayed calm. "I don't want trouble," he said. "I just want my daughter to be safe. That's all." The boy looked down, shifting his weight, realizing that the father wasn't bluffing. He had been caught, and now he was unsure what to do next. The father's presence, his calm but firm tone, and the fact that he was unwavering in his position had broken the boy's confidence for the first time. The backyard felt strangely quiet. The children's laughter seemed distant now. HOAKaren's eyes never left the father, a storm brewing behind her carefully controlled expression. The boy shuffled awkwardly, suddenly aware that he was no longer in control. And then the father made a silent promise to himself: he would not let fear, or the influence of HOAKaren, stop him from protecting his daughter. He was ready for whatever came next, whether it was a confrontation with the boy or with his powerful mother. The tension hung in the air like lightning before a storm. Every eye in the backyard was now aware that something serious was happening.
And deep down, the father knew that this confrontation was only the beginning of a battle that would change everything. The air in the backyard had changed. What began as a cheerful summer gathering now felt charged, as if the sun itself had dimmed to watch the tension unfold. The father's eyes never left Karen's son, and he could feel the weight of HOAKaren's gaze pressing down on him. She didn't speak at first, but her sharp eyes scanned the yard like a hawk, calculating, observing, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Karen's son, for his part, seemed unsettled. The confident smirk that had defined him all morning now twitched nervously. He shifted from foot to foot, glancing at his mother as if to ask, silently, "What do I do now?" But Karen had no intention of stepping in immediately. She had something else in mind. "Really, is this necessary?" HOAKaren's voice finally cut through the backyard. It was calm, almost sweet, but underneath was the kind of authority that made neighbors freeze in place. "Are we accusing my son of something at a party?" The father squared his shoulders, refusing to back down. "He was acting inappropriately around my daughter. I saw it myself." There was a pause. The other neighbors turned, some shocked, some whispering. Karen's lips pressed tight, her expression unreadable. Her son looked down, suddenly smaller, realizing that he might have miscalculated just how serious this was. HOAKaren took a step closer. "You're making a huge accusation," she said, her tone shifting, sharp and commanding now. "My son is a good boy. You," she paused, letting the words hang, "are overreacting." The father didn't flinch. "I'm not overreacting. I'm protecting my daughter." That's it. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The children's laughter had faded into the background. The splashing of water was distant, muted. The backyard felt like a stage, and everyone in it was holding their breath. Karen's son finally spoke, trying to regain his composure. "It's nothing. I didn't do anything wrong," he said, but the words sounded hollow, even to him. His small hands twisted together, betraying the confidence he had tried to project. HOAKaren's eyes narrowed. She was not used to being challenged, especially not by someone she considered beneath her in neighborhood hierarchy. She straightened, her posture rigid, the kind that said, "I am in charge here." "I don't like threats," she said quietly, but with lethal precision. "You should be careful what you say about my son." The father felt a surge of frustration mixed with fear. This wasn't just about a boy anymore. It was about power, influence, and control. HOAKaren had always had the neighborhood wrapped around her finger. She made the rules, enforced them, and expected everyone to obey. But today, he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. "I'm not threatening anyone," he said. "I'm only saying the truth. And my daughter's safety isn't up for debate." For a moment, it looked like the words had no effect. HOAKaren's lips pressed into a tight line, and she opened her mouth to argue, to assert dominance. But before she could, something shifted. The neighbors were now whispering more openly, some giving subtle nods of agreement to the father. The quiet discontent in the crowd gave him strength. He realized that Karen's aura of control could be challenged if people saw the truth clearly. Karen's son, sensing his mother's silent fury but also realizing he had no real defense, tried to deflect again. "It's not a big deal," he muttered, looking down at the ground, unsure where to direct his attention. The father took another step closer. "It is a big deal. You need to understand boundaries, respect, and consequences. That's what this is about." Karen's eyes flashed, a mix of anger and disbelief. "Consequences? For my son?" She stopped, catching herself mid-sentence. Perhaps she realized that accusing her in front of neighbors could backfire. Her son's nervous shift gave her pause. The tension in the yard was palpable. Every whispered conversation, every glance between neighbors, seemed amplified. The father's mind raced. This wasn't just a confrontation about a boy anymore, it was a test of courage, willpower, and influence. Then came the unexpected twist. Karen's son, previously quiet, made a small but defiant move. He stepped forward, just enough to make it clear he wasn't going to stay passive. "You can't prove anything,"
he shouted, his voice cracking slightly, a mixture of fear and bravado. That was the moment the father realized he had to escalate. He couldn't just rely on words anymore. He needed witnesses, evidence, and above all, the undeniable authority that Karen herself would respect. He glanced around the backyard. Some neighbors were watching, uncertain, hesitant to get involved, but he knew the truth spoke louder than fear. "Listen," he said calmly, looking directly at Karen's son. "I don't want this to get worse. But if you cross the line again, it won't just be words." "And your mother?" "She might not like it, but there are rules even she can't change." Karen's face paled slightly, the first crack in her armor of authority. She opened her mouth but then closed it. Her son, seeing the subtle shift, froze. The father's calm confidence, backed by clear truth, had changed the power dynamics in the yard. And just like that, the party that began as laughter and sunshine had transformed into a battleground of control, courage, and morality. The father realized that the escalation wasn't just about confrontation anymore, it was about setting boundaries, protecting what mattered, and showing that even the most powerful people couldn't bend reality to their will. As the summer sun dipped lower in the sky, shadows lengthening across the yard, the father knew that the next move by Karen, her son, or himself, would determine the course of the rest of the day. The real challenge had only just begun. The tension in the backyard had reached a breaking point. Shadows stretched long across the lawn, and the laughter of children now sounded hollow against the silence that had fallen. The father's eyes never left Karen's son. Every twitch of the boy's hand, every glance he stole at the daughter, told the father that the boy had no real understanding of boundaries, or maybe he didn't care. HOAKaren, still standing like a queen surveying her domain, finally made a step forward. Her expression was sharp, icy, unyielding. The neighbors were now watching closely, whispering among themselves. No one moved, as if they could feel the tension pressing down on their shoulders. But before Karen could speak, something unexpected happened. A car engine roared down the street, drawing everyone's attention. It was loud, startling, and unfamiliar in the quiet suburban afternoon. The father glanced at the street, confused, wondering who could be arriving at such a critical moment. And then the doors opened, and a figure stepped out, tall, authoritative, and unmistakable. It was the police chief himself. Not just any officer, this was Karen's husband, the father of the boy, a man whose reputation in the neighborhood was absolute. People froze. Conversations died midword. Even HOAKaren herself stiffened, a flash of tension crossing her face. The father felt a surge of both fear and relief. Fear, because confronting the police chief directly could be dangerous. Relief, because at last there was someone with authority who could see the truth clearly, without gossip or fear of HOA politics. The police chief walked toward the backyard slowly, his eyes scanning the scene. He didn't rush. He didn't shout. But there was an undeniable presence, a weight that made even Karen's son shift uneasily. The father watched closely, heart pounding. Could the truth finally get the attention it deserved? HOAKaren opened her mouth to speak, probably to protect her son. "Everything is fine," she began, but the chief raised a hand, and she fell silent. He stopped in front of the backyard, eyes narrowing slightly as he looked at the father, his daughter, and then his son. "What's going on here?" His voice was calm, but the authority behind it made even the boy flinch. The father explained everything quickly, choosing words carefully. He described the suspicious behavior, the moments of inappropriate attention, the way the boy had crossed boundaries. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't yell. He simply told the truth, letting the events speak for themselves. Karen's son, who had previously acted cocky and untouchable, now looked pale. The confident smirk was gone. He shifted nervously from foot to foot, realizing that the presence of his father, the police chief, changed everything. This wasn't a game anymore. The police chief's expression remained neutral, but the father could see the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He could sense that the man was processing, analyzing, deciding what was fair, what was right. No one expected what happened next. "Step aside," the police chief said quietly, addressing his son. "Now." The boy froze, confusion and fear battling across his face.
He had never been spoken to like this before, never ordered by his own father with such calm authority.
But he obeyed. Slowly, reluctantly, he stepped back, glancing at his mother as if begging for backup. HOAKaren opened her mouth again, her voice sharp. "You can't just."
Her husband's eyes met hers for a brief second, and she immediately fell silent.
The power dynamic had shifted completely.
The mother who controlled the neighborhood, the son who thought he could act untouchable, now both faced the unshakable authority of the chief. Then, the twist everyone had been waiting for, the police chief didn't just scold his son.
He acted decisively.
"You're coming with me," he said, his tone final.
"Now."
The boy's eyes widened in shock, disbelief flooding his face.
The father felt a surge of relief and amazement.
What no one had expected, the very person who might have been the ultimate shield for this misbehavior, was now enforcing consequences.
Justice, finally, was unfolding in real time. HOAKaren's jaw dropped.
She opened her mouth, but the words failed her.
The neighbors whispered excitedly, unable to hide their shock. Some looked at the father with admiration.
Some stared at the chief, wondering at the sheer force of authority and integrity he displayed. The father glanced at his daughter, whose eyes were wide with both confusion and relief. She didn't fully understand what had just happened, but she could feel the weight of safety returning. She hugged her father instinctively, and he held her close, feeling a mix of exhaustion, relief, and disbelief. The police chief, calm but firm, led his son toward the car. The boy, previously untouchable in his mind, had no choice but to obey. The father could see the realization dawn in the boy's eyes: there were limits to privilege. There were rules that no one, not even the child of HOAKaren, could bend. And as the car drove away, a heavy silence fell over the yard. The neighborhood would never forget this moment, the day the untouchable boy was held accountable, not by gossip or rumor, but by truth and authority. The father finally exhaled, relief flooding through him. But deep down, he knew this was just the twist in a larger story. The confrontation had ended, yes, but the drama of HOAKaren, her power, and her influence was far from over. The backyard felt unusually quiet after the police chief had taken his son away. The laughter of the children had stopped, replaced by a nervous, unsettled energy that hung in the air. Neighbors whispered among themselves, glancing at HOAKaren and the father, unsure what to say. Everyone could feel the weight of what had just happened. For the first time, someone who thought they were untouchable had faced real consequences. The father stood near his daughter, holding her hand tightly. She looked up at him, eyes wide, still trying to understand. "Daddy, he's gone?" she asked quietly. "Yes," he said, keeping his voice calm but firm.
"He can't bother you anymore."
Across the yard, HOAKaren was frozen, her usual sharp, controlling demeanor shaken. She opened her mouth, but no words came. For once, her authority felt powerless. The neighbors who usually nodded politely or avoided her gaze now looked at her with a mix of disbelief and newfound respect for the father. Some even whispered congratulations to him, though quietly, as if not daring to challenge the situation openly. Karen's son, once full of arrogance, had left with his father. The boy's absence was palpable. The way he had smirked, acted untouchable, and thought he could manipulate the backyard like a stage, none of it mattered anymore. Justice had come swiftly, decisively, and publicly. The father finally allowed himself to relax, but only slightly. He knew this wasn't just about a single confrontation. It was a message: boundaries matter, courage matters, and the powerful cannot always bend the rules to protect their own. His daughter sensed it too. She hugged him tightly, feeling safe for the first time that day, free from the uncomfortable attention she had endured. HOAKaren, still standing rigidly, finally spoke, her voice strained and defensive. This isn't over," she said, though the words lacked the force they usually carried. She looked around at the neighbors, trying to gauge their reactions. But the whispers, the subtle nods, the glances filled with judgment, it was clear she had lost the neighborhood's quiet allegiance. The father stepped forward, calm but unwavering. "It is over, Karen," he said firmly. "My daughter is safe, and your son has learned that actions have consequences. That's the end of it." The tension lingered, thick and heavy, but a sense of relief spread through the yard. The neighbors slowly returned to their conversations, the children cautiously resumed their play, and the father allowed himself a small, exhausted smile. He had protected his family, spoken the truth, and faced a challenge head-on. The day's events left ripples across the neighborhood. Whispers spread quickly, the untouchable HOA family had finally been held accountable, and it had happened because someone had the courage to stand up. Some neighbors felt vindicated, others shocked, but everyone knew the story would be remembered. Inside, the father reflected on what had happened. He thought about the small warnings he had ignored before, the subtle behaviors that had seemed harmless but were really signs of a problem. He realized how important it was to trust his instincts, to stand firm even when fear or social pressure tried to sway him. HOAKaren, meanwhile, retreated into her house, fuming silently. For all her power, influence, and status, she could not rewrite the truth. Her son had been confronted, disciplined, and removed from the situation. The mother who had once ruled the neighborhood with an iron fist now faced the humbling reality that even her family could be held accountable. The father turned to his daughter, kneeling to meet her eyes. "Remember this, sweetheart," he said softly. "Courage isn't about fighting everyone, it's about standing up for what's right, even when it's hard. Today, you learned that too." She nodded, her small face serious. "I won't forget, Daddy." And in that quiet, sunlit backyard, with shadows stretching long and the tension slowly dissipating, justice had been served. Not with anger or revenge, but with truth, courage, and the unwavering resolve to protect what mattered most. The father knew the neighborhood had changed that day. People had seen that even those with power could be held accountable. He also knew the story wasn't just about his family, it was about the message that courage and honesty could triumph over fear and privilege. As the sun began to dip behind the houses, casting long golden streaks across the yard, he finally allowed himself to breathe fully. Justice had come. The lesson was clear. And while the drama of HOAKaren and her son wasn't over entirely, the balance had shifted, decisively, permanently. The neighborhood had finally settled, but it would never be the same again. The echoes of that summer day, the confrontation, the arrival of the police chief, the shocking consequences lingered in every corner. Children played with less carefree abandon, neighbors whispered less discreetly, and HOAKaren's once unshakable authority had been quietly but unmistakably shaken. The father watched his daughter splash in the pool again, her laughter returning but now lighter, freer. She glanced at him with a small, grateful smile, and in that moment, he knew that protecting her had been worth every second of tension, every heartbeat of fear. This wasn't just about one day. It was about showing her, and the neighborhood, that courage and truth mattered more than power or intimidation. Across the street, whispers had grown into stories shared between neighbors. People retold the events with subtle awe, incredulity, and even relief. Some admitted privately that they had always been intimidated by HOAKaren and her son, hesitant to speak up or intervene. Now, those fears seemed smaller, more manageable. The father had done what many had only wished they could, he had stood firm and ensured justice was done. HOAKaren, meanwhile, retreated into her house, the curtains drawn, the aura of untouchable authority broken. Her son, once a symbol of defiance and arrogance, had faced the consequences of his actions. He stayed quieter now, less confident, perhaps beginning to understand the weight of accountability in a way he never had before. The father reflected on the lessons of the day. Boundaries, he realized, weren't just rules to enforce, they were shields to protect what mattered most. Courage wasn't loud or aggressive, it was the quiet, firm resolve to stand for what is right, even when facing fear or opposition. And power, no matter how great, could never overwrite truth or integrity. His daughter leaned against him, drying herself with a towel, and asked quietly, "Daddy, will he ever bother anyone again?" He smiled gently, holding her hand. "He'll think twice now. And even if he doesn't, you know how to stand up and protect yourself, and I'll always be here for you." As the sun began to set, casting long golden shadows across the backyard, the father took a deep breath. The events of the day had left marks, but they had also created a sense of resilience. He knew that life in the neighborhood would continue, full of its petty disputes and minor dramas, but the balance had shifted. The lesson was clear: courage, vigilance, and integrity could protect the ones you loved, and even those who seem untouchable could be held accountable. Neighbors began to leave slowly, returning to their homes with hushed discussions.
The father stood at the edge of the yard, watching the world settle back into motion.
A quiet smile crossed his face. Today, he hadn't just defended his daughter, he had sent a message to the neighborhood, one that would be remembered for a long time. No one is above respect, no one is above the truth, and justice, when pursued with courage, cannot be ignored.
HOAKaren's family would recover, eventually.
Her son would learn, eventually. But the father knew that this day had changed something permanent. It had reminded everyone watching, and his daughter most of all, that standing up for what is right matters more than fear, intimidation, or social power. The pool glimmered in the fading sunlight, the water sparkling like tiny diamonds.
Laughter slowly returned, cautious but genuine.
The father knelt down beside his daughter and whispered, "Always remember this, my dear.
Courage is not about fighting everyone, it's about knowing what's right and protecting it, no matter what."
She nodded, understanding more than her young years could fully grasp. Together, they watched the sun dip behind the houses, feeling safe, victorious, and ready for whatever the future might bring. In the quiet that followed, one thing was certain: the story of that summer day, the confrontation, the twist, the justice, would live on in the neighborhood. And the lesson was clear to all who had witnessed it: courage and truth can overcome fear, and justice is never truly out of reach.